right. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Greenstreet. I am an assistant astronomer at NORLab, and I largely study the orbital dynamics of small bodies across the solar system. So today I'm going to be talking about the importance of identifying the dynamical nature of small bodies throughout the solar system, because the processes of planet formation and the early evolution of the solar system is imprinted on all of the small bodies across the solar system in both their physical compositions and their orbital architectures. And so by better understanding these processes within our own solar system, we not only learn more about our own solar system, but we can put our solar system in the greater context of these many exoplanetary systems that we just heard about are all throughout the galaxy and beyond. So, astronomical surveys that have been designed to find small bodies in the solar system have been discovering tens of thousands of small bodies each year for roughly the past 35 years. And the astrometric measurements that come from those observations are then most often sent off to the Minor Planet Center, which computes orbits for those bodies. And currently, we know of about 1.4 million small bodies in the solar system that have these well constrained orbits. We then often split those orbits up into different categories. So in the inner solar system, here you can see in this plot of semi-major axis versus eccentricity that there's a lot of structure here in the orbital parameters of bodies in the inner solar system. So we tend to separate the near-Earth objects, which are further subdivided into four different subpopulations. We separate these from both the main belt asteroids and the Jupiter Trojans. And because we see structure in the main belt, we also further subdivide the main belt into, again, subpopulations based on that orbital structure that we see. When we move from the inner solar system to the outer solar system, we distinguish comets from asteroids, not just because of their physical appearance, but also based on their orbits. And we further subdivide the comets as well into different orbital classes. And then in the trans-Neptunian region, beyond Neptune, this was a figure that Pedro showed on Tuesday and talked about. There's also many different populations in here that we divide out based on their orbits. Now, some of these divisions are a little bit arbitrary, but there's also a lot of information that's held within the orbital architecture of the small bodies in the solar system. So in particular, in the outer solar system, the structure that we see can help to better inform us about the early evolution of the solar system. In particular, it is what has led us to believe that there was this period of giant planet instability where the giant planets were formed in a completely different place from where they are now. They moved through the disk of planetesimals, scattering many objects around, ejecting many from the solar system. So in this toy model with 3 planets in the inner solar system that was made by Sean Raymond in 2012, you can see that as these planets are moving around, there's lots of objects getting scattered to very different orbits. But you can see as well, kind of in the middle here, that there's these objects that seem to be going kind of up and down at constant semi-major axis, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. But pretty soon this movie is going to zoom out, and you can see that as these planets were moving around, they made this very specific type of architecture in the orbits of the small bodies here as well. And so it imprinted this process on the architecture of these small body orbits. And so that's what we see in particular in the outer solar system today of this process that these objects underwent. In particular, one population that's really useful for being able to constrain these early evolution models are the objects that are captured into resonances with Neptune. So as Neptune, being the farthest planet from the sun, migrated outwards, its resonances, which are outside of the planet, also swept through the disk, capturing things into those resonances through this process of migration. And so today we can look at the number of objects that are currently in these resonances, and we can use these objects to help put some constraints on how this process occurred. For instance, constraints on the mass of the disk of the planetesimals, or the speed and the timing at which the giant planet migration occurred. And so these are helpful, important things for us being able to constrain these models. However, the challenge is being able to know which of these objects in the trans-Neptunian region are actually in these resonances. So if I took this figure and instead of having it color coded here, it was just a black and white figure, there's many objects in this trans-Neptunian region. It's a little difficult just from looking at the current orbital elements of these bodies to figure out which ones are actually in a resonance. And so in order to do that, we actually need to understand how their orbits vary over time. And so in this video that I showed before, these objects in the center here that are going up and down, these are the objects that after we see them going up and down at constant semi-major axis, we can then know are in these resonances. So we need to know the time variability of their orbital evolutions over time to know whether things are in a resonance. And then we can use these populations to constrain these early evolution models of the solar system. Another example are the Jupiter Trojans. So we know currently of about 12,000 Jupiter Trojans. These are bodies that are believed to have been captured into this resonance with Jupiter at the time that the planets formed, and they were captured as Jupiter in particular migrated through this disk of planetesimals. So we can use them to be able to constrain Jupiter's early migration through the planetesimal disk. However, looking again at this black and white plot on the left, it's a little difficult to know all of these objects that have orbits similar to Jupiter's orbit. How do we know whether they all are actually part of this primordial population in order to be able to use them to constrain these models of Jupiter's migration? There could be interlopers in this population as well. Just by looking at this plot, we don't really know which are which. So we do know that many planets in the solar system host these populations of temporarily resonant Trojans. And from a large numerical study I did a few years ago, we know that Jupiter should have up to 100 of these temporarily resonant Trojans that can remain resonant for up to 10 million years before they exit the resonance. So we recently went looking for these objects among the known population. So trying to figure out with all of these objects in the figure on the right, which ones are actually resonant for long periods of time and which aren't. So we ran some integrations of their orbital evolution for all 12,000 objects, looking for these objects that leave the resonance after some time or are not in the resonance at all. So we took this black and white figure on the right, and we were able to color code it now with this plot on the left that breaks this down into the resonant behavior of the objects in this part of the solar system. So all of the objects that are cyan in color are those primordial Trojans that we believe have been trapped in this resonance with Jupiter for the age of the solar system. So these are the objects we can use to constrain models of Jupiter's early migration. However, the green and the red objects are those that are either only temporarily in the resonance or aren't resonant at all. And so these objects in particular cannot be used to be able to constrain Jupiter's migration. However, you'll see some of these actually overlap with where most of the primordial Trojans are. So it's important to be able to distinguish these objects from the primordial population. There are a number of things that we can use in particular for these objects that aren't primordial Trojans that can still tell us information about how the planets formed and have evolved. So most of these temporarily resonant objects or non-resonant objects likely formed farther from the sun than the rest of the primordial Trojans. So they should have physical properties that look more like the centaurs that formed farther from the sun. If we have many of these objects that are actually captured centaurs that are currently sitting in this resonance with Jupiter, they're actually closer to the Earth than many typical centaurs. And so they could be possible targets for upcoming spacecraft rendezvous missions. And since these objects formed out in the giant planet region, we've never actually studied one of these objects up close. But learning more about its physical property through a spacecraft rendezvous mission would help us better understand how the giant planets formed. Some of these objects could also be pristine comets that are just now entering the warmer environment near Jupiter for the first time. And so they could become active for the first time as they're entering this warmer part of the solar system. An example of this is 2019 LD2 that was discovered a few years ago. it was thought that it might actually be the first Jupiter Trojan to have cometary activity. It's sitting on an orbit near Jupiter, so it was thought it was a Trojan. But when there were studies done of its orbital evolution, we actually realized it's not a Trojan. It's a Jupiter family comet that just happens to have an orbit like that of Jupiter right now as it's continuing to evolve through the solar system. But if we can find more of these objects that are just starting to become active, we can learn a whole host of information from these bodies. We can better understand the nature by which the outburst process happens. We can determine how often these outbursting events occur, and we can better understand how cometary activity evolves over time by watching it from its start all the way through when it starts to fade. And we can also, maybe most importantly, determine the distribution of volatiles across the solar system. And all of these things are really important, again, for us understanding how the planets formed, knowing what type of material is in the solar system and where it's located. The challenge, of course, is being able to find all of these rare gems, the most important rare gems, I would argue, in the solar system for helping us best understand planet formation and evolution. And these are just a few of the different examples that I've been able to talk about, but there are others. So, what we really need is rather than just looking at their orbits, we need to be able to look at how their orbits evolve over time in order to make sure that we know which ones are those most useful, helpful, important rare gems that can help us be able to constrain planet formation and evolution models. And in the era of large surveys, when we have large numbers of these objects, we need the right tools to be able to pull these specific objects out of those data sets. So, for example, this was the figure I showed before with current surveys discovering bodies in the solar system. If we add in Rubin's LSST here, we have to zoom way out in order to see the contribution that LSST is going to make. And so LSST is going to discover roughly 6 million new solar system objects compared to the 1.5 we know about today. And so, in order to extract from these objects, which are these really useful rare gems, we need more tools. So one of them that's currently under development is being developed by my collaborator, Kat Volk at PSI, and BYU graduate student Dahlin Spencer, called the Small Body Dynamics tool. And I won't go through everything that this tool can do, but it is a very user-friendly Python tool that allows people to either input observed objects or simulated objects and at the end be able to understand the resonant nature, the dynamical classification of objects, which is really useful. And because they're getting ready for these larger data sets, they're also currently working on trying to put together a machine learning classifier for objects, particularly in the outer solar system. So, since I am out of time, I'm just going to read my last slide to you. Every object in the solar system has the details of planet formation and early solar system evolution imprinted on it. However, some objects, due to their current locations and dynamical nature within the solar system, are likely to have higher scientific value for unlocking the answers to the open questions about how planets and small bodies were formed and how the solar system has evolved over the past 4.6 billion years, which can help to place our solar system within the context of the vast number of exoplanetary systems across the Milky Way and beyond. So, in order to find these most valuable rare gems in the